is being used and whether it's being used in a correct way. And with this evolution over time, we've almost collected BI technologies and BI tools. So many organizations that have been building their data platforms for a very long time have more than one BI tool. And it's quite difficult for a user to find an answer to a question. But the end result of all of this and the real challenge that we are struggling with is that we don't know what data we have. We don't know where to find it. And even if we can find it, we don't know what it means or even how to use it. So my tip number one to resolve this challenge is to implement a single access point to information. And that's actually a really simple thing to do. That could be a data analytics portal. And the reason is that I don't think that we can really, with all of the complexity that we have in our data environments, get to a point where we have a single version of the truth. I think we have many versions of the truth, and we're never going to get to that single point or that single version of the truth. But what we can do is we can create the single entry point to information. And this single entry point is to governed information. So the language in our organizations should become, well, did you get that information from the portal? If you didn't get it from the portal, then can we trust it? It's also a really easy way for a user to find the right information because they don't see the different tools in the background. All they see is there is a single self-service portal. When I click there, I get a list of reports, I get a list of self-service application, but it doesn't matter what technology sits behind it. So that's kind of sort of addressing the complexity for the user, and at the same time making sure that we are using data in a governed way. Tip number two is that you have to make your data findable and understandable. Now, metadata management, I think, is one of the most underrated data management disciplines that there is. Unless you're a bank and you are compelled by legislation to be able to explain where your data comes from, what the lineage is, etc., most organizations will not invest in metadata management because it is expensive. It's not just expensive in terms of technology, but you also have to have a process in place where people in your organization, data reference or data stewards, whatever you want to call them, um, have a platform or a forum where they together agree on what the common data language of the organization is. So it's not just a technology issue, it's a process and a people issue as well. But, you can build it yourself. You do not have to implement a really expensive metadata management tool. It is about understanding what is enough, what is just enough for my organization that's going to help me understand where my data is, that will enable me to get the lineage so that I can have a view of where my data comes from and how we're managing it. So this is an example of a custom built data dictionary on the left and a business glossary on the right, but they are linked, so you have the lineage across the two. And this was built on an open source platform called Django. But previous companies that I've worked with have also, we used whatever was available. So Apex in Oracle, for example, we've used that. We've used Excel lists in SharePoint. And of course, this doesn't come with all the bells and the whistles. But again, it's about what is enough for my organization. Now, once you have your business glossary and your data dictionary in place, what you can do then, and this is tip number three, is you can embed data understanding in all of your data products. And one way that you can do that is that you can surface the business glossary in your reports, in your dashboards, your self-service applications, etc. So basically what you're seeing here is someone hovering over a metric in this dashboard, and up pops the description. Now, of course, this could be more than a description. It could entail the owner. It should entail the owner of this particular metric. You can even add the last date that the data was updated. You can add in the data quality rating, the business rules, the calculation. Um, it's whatever is going to help you or your user understand what it is that they're looking at. And for me, this is the absolute straight line between 2 points when it comes to data literacy. Not everyone has the luxury of implementing a very sophisticated data literacy program, but you can do this. You can put the information at the point where the user is using it and needs to understand it. Another way that you can do this is an example of where there's a chatbot on the DNA portal, and a user can ask the chatbot for, what does, in this case, application date mean? And it's using the business glossary as the knowledge base, but it's just a nice, easy way to give users direct access to what's in that business glossary. All right, let's look at a value.
Merit,
Yes.
can we, just before we continue, there was a question, how it poses it. Did you actually build, maybe there are two questions. Did you build your own unified metadata model? And maybe you can just give us a sense of the user's emotive response to what you built. I can just imagine it was warm. So could you maybe just tell us, so first of all, Howard's question is it like a unified meta model?
We did,
And then
yes.
and that question one, and then question two is just give the community a sense as to when you gave your users that level of certainty and comfort, how did they respond?
So we did design our own meta model. And okay, maybe at this point I have to, it's a good segue into, the difference between spending the money on a metadata management tool and building it yourself. It is going to take longer for you to build it, and you need the right skills. So if you're going to build it yourself, it's not a trivial thing, especially if you have to design the meta model that sits behind it. So you need someone who is experienced and has the ability to do that. So it's not necessarily an easy thing to do. That's the one thing. The second, or the answer to the second question, is that it hasn't been rolled out. As we haven't completely rolled it out. We have a limited rollout at the moment, but the potential of how this can drive data literacy, there's certainly an appreciation for it.
Understand. Great. Wow.
All right, so value. So the challenge with value is that anyone who's managing a data office or a central data team um, will know how big that chasm is between requirements and demand and capacity. There's never going to be enough capacity. So especially at a strategic level, if you are delivering strategic insights and strategic data products, then prioritization becomes even more important. But because you absolutely have to know that you are focusing on the right things. And if those priorities are unclear, or there are too many priorities, then you can't deliver value. There's just no way. So one way that you can address that is to get executive prioritization for your data program. And this is something that I only learned later in my career. This is not something that I did when I first started to work with organizations to formulate their data strategies. It was always very much focused on the aspirational side of the data strategy. And what I realized is that the real work actually sits in once you have your data strategy to then get down to the nitty gritties and say, right, we can do all this stuff, but you've got to prioritize what we are going to do. And that's specifically the use cases that you're going to use to build all of these components that you have in your data strategy. Now, one way that you can do that is, or that you should do it, is it's got to be really clear. And this is an example of a one pager with all of the possible use cases that can be included in your data strategy. And I say all the possible use cases because it's basically taking your business value chain end to end and saying for each of the phases in your value chain, or you could have taken your product life cycle or your customer life cycle, whatever. But what you do is you identify for each phase in that value chain or life cycle, what is the data and analytics use case for each of those? And then on the left-hand side, what you see is, I call them super use cases because they're made up of smaller use cases. And the reason they're kind of a collection of smaller use cases is that, it's very rare where you're going to deliver, an AI model without the actual data that you need for that model, or the reporting in place to help users understand the outputs or the outcomes of that model, or the data quality use cases that's going to ensure that you're going to get a quality answer. So what you can do is, for each of those use cases across your data value chain, to say end to end, what is each of the use cases for each phase, from data to provisioning, or data collection to data provisioning to reporting. And then, giving a little bit of an example. This is what it could look like. And this is the actual benefit of this use case. And it gives enough information for an executive forum, whether that's your data steerco or, your operating forum. It's enough information for them to make a decision on the priorities. All right, so let's talk about ownership. So the challenge with ownership is that everyone thinks it's a great idea until they have to actually do it. So, often, or what I've heard often is, yeah, it's a good idea. We need data owners, we need data stewards, but you know what? It's like it's an IT initiative. I mean, why should the business get involved? What benefit is there for the business in data ownership and data stewardship? Now, this is, of course, nonsense. Data governance, data ownership cannot be an IT-driven initiative. It's a business-driven, IT-enabled initiative. So how do you do that? How do you land the message that it's actually the business that owns data, not IT, not the data office? We're the stewards. We just make sure that the data is available, it is of good quality, etc., but we don't own it. So tip number 5 is start at the top. So start with executive data ownership and do that in the context of your data domains. And I'm pretty sure for this particular audience, I don't have to say that. But start with your data domains and then go down to your subdomains. So, for example, in HR, the HR director is the executive data owner for HR data, but in their team, they have managers who are responsible for different components of the employee life cycle. So you have a recruitment manager, you have a payroll manager, and for each of those subdomains, there has to be a owner as well. And within their teams, there should be stewards who understand that data very well. They're the SMEs, they're the people who is going to help the data office with checking the data quality reports, etc. So this is probably one of the hardest things that you have to do as a data professional, because like I say, everyone thinks data ownership is a great idea until you have to actually do it. But it does make it easier when you start at the top. All right, controls. So, data governance is definitely seen as a grudge task. It's not exactly seen as something that's driving business value. More often than not, it's seen as something that's incredibly intrusive, and it's just for compliance. So we do it because we absolutely have to. We don't do it because we want to and we understand the value of it. So very compliance driven. Again, seen as an IT initiative. So as a business person, why should I even get involved? Why should I even understand it? I don't want to, it's not in my wheelhouse. And what happens is that you end up with no real strategy for data governance, and it's not included in your data strategy. So, how do you solve this problem? And again, for me, this is about you can absolutely boil the ocean, but you don't have to. I think you have to focus on the things that's going to bring value to your organization. And how you can kind of identify what those things are is to firstly align it with your data strategy, which is aligned with your organizational strategy. So this is an example of a data strategy map. And right at the top, we have organizational strategy. And underneath, all the different components or pillars of a data strategy. And part of one of those pillars should be data governance. And this is a little story. You read it top to bottom. So, for example, if you take customer driven analytics as a data goal, because maybe, for example, this organization, their strategy is customer driven products, maybe hyper personalization, etc. It's all about the customer. And customer driven analytics is the data goal that's going to support and realize this business strategy. From an analytical point of view, um, maybe it's about we want AI enabled customer products and services. So, RPA maybe, smart bots on our website, that kind of thing. Um, so there's some critical capabilities that you need from an AI point of view. You want to use AI for these innovative products. You'll need a single view of the customer because you need a 360 view of the customer, etc. But the point here is you can put all of those things in place, but if you haven't thought through what is the data governance capability that we're going to need to support all of this, you might end up in trouble, because in this case, you're going to use customer data in a way that could put you in a position where you might end up with reputational damage, very angry customers, etc. So maybe the data governance capability that you want to include in your data strategy is data ethics, or very intentional focus on data ethics. But the point I'm trying to make is that it has to be included, data governance has to be included in your data strategy. And secondly, you have to be very clear on what data governance capabilities you want to build for your organization. All right, so around expectations. So when it comes to data strategies, when you start off, when you present it, everyone's really excited about it because it's exciting. There's some amazing data and analytics things that's going to happen in the future, and the expectation is that this is really going to move the dial for the organization. And the reality is that right now where you are is not exactly nirvana. It's probably closer to data hell, and you don't even know how you're going to get to this nirvana from where you are. And the thing is that successful data strategies, and again, kind of a hard lesson that I had to learn in my own career, is only 1% formulation. 99% is about execution. So once you have your beautiful data strategy, what you have to do again is put in the hard work and understand, how do I get from where I am now to where I'm going to be in future, or where I want to be. So this is an example of a data strategy roadmap, and you'll see right at the start, this is a data governance roadmap. Right at kind of on the left-hand side is, okay, this company is right now at a level 1 data governance maturity. Where they want to end up in 3 years' time, looks like 3.5 years' time, is they want to be a level 3 data governance company. So how do they get there? The first step is to plot how you get from level 1 to level 2. So those are the maturity milestones. And then how do you get from level 2 to level 3? And once you've got that done, your or your third step is to say, right, what do we need to do to actually get to that milestone? What do we have to have in place? And again, this could be people skills. It could be a process that you have to put in place. It could be a technology. I mean, probably all three of those. But the thing is that you have something that you can present, you have something that can manage the expectations, and you have something that you can measure progress against. And that's really, really important if you're going to manage expectations around what is possible. All right, benefit. So this is definitely one of my soapbox topics. I could talk about um, data analytics ROI for a day. And I always find it really ironic that our job as data professionals is to help our organizations measure how well they are doing, but it's not something that we do for ourselves. And the reason is, people think it's really hard. It's hard to define and measure the value of data analytics in your organization, because the perception is that the benefits of data and analytics programs is intangible. And I have to say, I haven't come across a single thing in my career that couldn't be measured if you fully understand the problem you are solving, or the opportunity that you are unlocking. So, for example, if your strategic data goal is self-service BI, to roll out self-service BI, that's kind of hard to measure the success if your reason for doing it is for better decision making. Better decision making it's not impossible to measure it, but it is hard. But if you have a full understanding of what the problem is that you're solving, and maybe it is we want to roll out self-service BI guided analytics because we have this scourge of manual reporting going on in our organization. That's measurable. That's measurable for sure. So again, it's about kind of really doing the work to understand what it is that you want to achieve. It is time consuming. It's definitely time consuming because a lot of the data that you're going to need to measure your data program, it's probably going to be manual. So you have to be selective about what it is that you want to measure. And again, it's about understanding what shifts you want to make with your data strategy. And then a lack of clear KPIs, and that's really linked to not understanding what problems you're solving or what opportunities you are opening up. And a very important one that we don't always talk about is KPI ownership. So again, just like data ownership and data stewardship cannot sit solely in your central data team, KPI ownership of your data strategy or your data program cannot just sit with the data team. There's definitely some ownership in the business as well. So how do you solve this? So one way you can do it is that you can create a data scorecard. And there are a few things that I want to point out on this scorecard. First, if you read it from left to right, the first thing is that it's very clear that each of these data goals has a measure. At least one. I wouldn't say more than three, but at least one. You have to be a why would you have it as a data goal if you're not going to measure the progress on it or the benefit of it? The second thing that I want to point out is that each of these measures actually has an owner. It's not just the data office. There's some business ownership here as well, and it's made very, very clear. The other thing that's really, really important is to know how you're going to or when you're going to measure it. So is it quarterly? Is it monthly? Is it an annual measure? And again, this comes back to managing expectation, because you're building stuff and the benefit will not be immediately measurable. So you've got to decide on when will we actually see the benefit of this particular measure or this deliverable. So you need some kind of timeline where you can show, look, I mean, we're only going to be able to see the benefit from quarter 3 for this or that reason, and we're only actually going to start measuring it from quarter 3 or from quarter 4. I think that's all I wanted to point out. Oh, yes. Okay. One last thing. This is a bonus tip, by the way. If you can't benchmark your measure at the start of your data strategy, it's probably a sign that you don't fully understand the benefit that you're trying to measure. So, for example, oh, I actually have reduced manual reporting on here. You should be able to quantify what manual reporting costs your organization in productivity hours. If you can't do that, that's a clear sign that you're not going to be able to measure the benefit of this particular data goal. And that's why it's so important that you put the work in right at the start, and understand what it is that the shifts you want to make, what are the things, the benefits that you want to realize. Now, if you don't have the time to, create this data scorecard, and a lot of that data, like I said, is going to be manual, it's not going to be automated, you can sort of limit it more to the things that can be automated, and because less is more. And this is an example. The previous data analytics portal that I showed you, you can gather data of the usage of that portal. So for example, if your data goal is to shift or make a shift in your organization away from manual, ungoverned data usage to governed data usage, then this would be a good way to measure that shift. So you will be able to see how many new users you have on the portal, how many repeat users. You can see in this case exactly which of the self-service applications they are using. And this is really important information, because this is going to show whether this deliverable is actually being used. Actually, it's more than one deliverable. It's the portal as well as your self-service applications. All right. So in conclusion, I've got 3 key takeaways, and I hope I repeated these often enough during my presentation. But the first thing is really just to focus. I think there is a temptation to do too much. So when we put our data strategies together, we just want to move the earth. But it's better to focus and make sure that you are focusing on the right things. Again, less is more. So if you are going to build a business glossary, for example, start with your critical data. And that would be different for every organization, but you don't have to get every single business term in your organization into that business glossary within the first year. Just start with what is absolutely most important. Secondly, use what you already have, because I think funding is often a stumbling block for us to implement data management and data governance technologies. But use what you have. Go scratch around in your IT stable. There's always something you can use. Take my word for it. And then get the basics right first. And this is sometimes a hard conversation with your operating board or your executives, because everyone wants the sexy stuff. Not everyone wants to talk about data governance and data management. It's not concepts that everyone understands. But I do think if you can translate your data governance and data management strategy and outcomes in business terms and show the real value, it's absolutely doable. Again, it's understanding what is it that you want to get out of that strategy, because data governance and data management strategies have outcomes as well. It's got benefits as well. It solves problems. And you need to understand what that is so that you can benchmark it, measure it, explain it, show ROI on it. And that's it. Any questions?
Fantastic, Maritza. Thank you so much for just the mechanism of just unpacking in the form of tips. And so just love the fact that you've been able to share with us. In fact, the passion with which you shared some of the tips, if one looks at that, you go, okay, you have learned through not doing that, and you are sharing it with the community in terms of.
Absolutely.
So isn't it wonderful that when somebody's sharing their scars, it comes across as passion? And so thank you. What you've done for us is just really
Thank you.
given us an indication and a welcome to your world. There were a whole host of questions that were popping up as they were coming through, and I'm going to do the following: is I'm going to take questions with hands up, and then I'm going to go back to the chat for those questions we haven't. Maritza, I decided not to stop the flow. It was just too good to just get the full immersion. And so I hope you're okay with questions coming from all over the place. So can I just go across to Don? Don, can you pose your question to Maritza, please?
Excellent. Thank you, JG. Maritza, you mentioned that you developed your own approach to managing the metadata and the framework that you were developing. Are there off-the-shelf software or frameworks that are available commercially? And I was just interested in what those might be.
Yeah. So if you Google, you're going to find probably Calibra. Calibra is used by most of the banks in South Africa. IBM has a metadata management. I can't remember what it is called. Yolanda might remember. There's another one called Elation. It's a newer tool, but it's definitely gaining some ground. So there's some good ones in the market. They're all positioned slightly differently. And again, it's understanding what benefits you want to get from metadata management, and that will help you understand which of those tools will be the best fit for your organization. And the one thing I also have to say is that the level of maturity that you need to use these tools, to implement them and use them in your organization is very different. Some of them you need a very high level of maturity, and in others you need a lower level. So again, something that's very important to bear in mind when you assess these tools.
Great, thank you so much.
Thanks, Don.
I do have a scorecard for you. If you do want to assess a metadata management tool, I've got a scorecard that you can use, and I'm happy to share it with you.
I would really appreciate that. I'll reach out to you.
Okay, you can hit me up on LinkedIn.
Thank you. Thanks, Don. Thanks for that. Yolanda?
Yes, hi. I just wanted to add to the metadata list. I see Drew has brought in IBM's name, which is they have a larger suite called InfoSphere that has all of the data quality and data governance in it, but information governance catalog is the module in there that does the business metadata and glossary. I think the biggest challenge that we have is probably when it comes to this. I've seen that Microsoft has started to invest in it. They're probably first to market with but AWS's governance and metadata is still relatively immature. So if you are looking for tools, just take into consideration if you're in a cloud environment that you need to bring that into your decision criteria as well.
Such a good point. And what I've seen with the cloud catalogs is that they're not as sophisticated as some of the tools that's been around for a while. And you actually have to focus more on the process that's going to support your metadata capability than the technology, because the that process, like the workflows and the approval workflows, that kind of thing is not built in like it would be in the more established tools. So definitely something to keep in mind.
Great, thanks, Yolanda. Howard?
Yeah, there's also a tool that's really gathering momentum now. It's Data Hub. It's a free tool and it works both on the cloud, and you also have a container that you can download, and it's got lots of the connectors to all sorts of different data management systems that will pull the data in. One of the biggest problems I've seen with a lot of these things is when they pull this data in, it almost becomes like a swamp of information all over the place. And so categorizing it, structuring it in your domains and subject areas is critical. Otherwise, you'll load it up and before you know it, before you open your eyes, you've got 10,000 different attributes and things and data sets. And then it's about making sense of this metadata. And so you can quickly get into a mess, but it's a nice tool to start learning. And I really agree with Maritza in terms of getting those principles, policies, and procedures that defined before you jump into the tech, and have a reference architecture there that brings it together.
100%. I think when it comes to metadata management, again, very, very difficult, very expensive lesson that I had to learn in my career was it doesn't start with the technology. It actually starts with the people. If you don't have your data stewardship network in place, metadata management is just not going to be successful, because who's going to manage the business glossary? Who's going to make the decisions around new terms and definitions, etc.? So you have to have that in place first, and it's always about the people, isn't it, Howard? It always starts with people.
Yeah.
So maybe Maritza, just a question. You mentioned, I think it was tip 5. I didn't forget exactly. I think it was tip 5, but it was this construct of it's got to do with prioritization. And you one of the key things you said, it's really important just to get the air cover from the executive. Get it? Now, when one considers the different use cases that it is possible for the data to address and offer value within, how do you set the executives up in a prioritization process where they're comparing apples with apples, and also helping them understand some of the feasibility of whether some of the use cases are easily executable, harder to execute? So agree completely that there's this desire and need for an executive. But if you look at it from the executive's perspective, you're asking them sometimes to prioritize with low context. So can you give us a sense in terms of how you've demystified that for the executives, maybe an example that you can share with the community?
Yeah, so it's really about giving enough information for executives to make decisions, but not overwhelming them with too much information. And I do think each organization will be different because each executive, in terms of maturity and focus, will be different. The key is going to be definitely starting with the data strategy alignment with the actual organizational strategy and linking that to the use cases. The example that I showed, it we kind of plotted the use cases against the business value chain. And there was a very specific reason for that. But you could also identify those super use cases for each of each of the strategic goals that your organization has, that you can do that as well. So it's about what is going to connect the dots for your executives, what's going to speak to them, rather than, talking about metadata management tools, and we've got to implement a metadata management tool. It's just that doesn't land. It's got to be something that speaks to them, that solves real problems for them. And when you present it that way, it's easier to make a decision. I mean, I haven't had any challenges when I do it that way, where they don't understand what is needed from them and how to do that prioritization.
Thanks for that. I'm just looking through some of the points predominantly, Howard. There was it was in and around the unified metadata model, but it quickly went across the constructs of the business value chain and the corresponding data value chain, and then the data ROI. Howard, give us a sense in terms of what was going through your mind there. Were you seeing?
Yeah,
were you aligning, or was there a bit of a gap? Just give us a sense as to where you were.
I think what I was saying were a few things. One was, yes, if we have to understand our business architecture. That's almost where we start, is understanding the value proposition. And I really liked Yolanda's talk on the wine example of the data products and the business value chain, and what's the value proposition to our stakeholders, and then how do we almost align a data value chain, not so much the movement of data, but as the data product gets more and more exciting. And I think Yolanda quoted like the raw grapes, and so it went on to the wine bottle, and so that the data becomes more valuable, the data component or the data product in each level of the chain. And I was also reminded of that strategic alignment assessment that we should be doing on a regular basis, to be able to say, well, how aligned are we? And it's also not just between data, digital, and business. It can also be data and infosec and all the other ones that we need to bring together, because we've also got application and IT running in a direction. So how aligned are we across all these areas that we need to work together on?
Cool. And maybe, Howard, just a question. You raised it in terms of the subject area model, and then Maritza, you spoke about this construct of prioritization and the construct of stewarding, and the fact that there's now I love the value chain description of a business. But the moment one takes a value chain description of the business, you immediately have to entertain the construct that you've got subject areas that are blending and moving as you start, I'm going to say from left to right, but as you progress across your value chain. And so I'm going to actually pose a question to both Howard and Maritza. It's, when we talk data value chains and we talk subject areas and we talk stewarding, immediately we now start to mess with organizational structures of ownership and so on. Can you guys give us a sense in terms of how you've seen that with some clients and how that's been navigated? Maybe Maritza, just starting with yourself.
So JG, is the question, how you kind of still keep things simple, because now you've got the business value chain, but now you've got a data value chain, and everything
you've gone
starts
matrix.
yeah,
You've
you've
gone
got matrix.
you've gone
Yeah.
matrix.
Yeah, you have. So for me, that's why those super use cases are so important, because if you think about it, if you have your business value chain, you've identified your super use cases for each phase of your value chain, your business value chain, each of those should translate to every other area of data management, data governance. So each of those use cases or subject areas should translate into business processes that has, or whether it's business processes or data domains and subdomains and processes that's got owners. In the same way, they will translate into the subject areas maybe on your self-service portal. So they kind of pull through to everything. And the other thing that I want to point out is that your data value chain is probably going to apply to every single super use case or subject area. It's not going to, I see it as less of a matrix and more of a sort of a sub process within, or sub use cases within that super overarching business use case. Because like I said, it's very rare where you're going to deliver something in data and analytics where you didn't have to think about the data. You didn't have to think about the data quality. You didn't have to think about how we're going to present this to the business. You have to think about all of those components for everything that you deliver.
Thank you. How would you so there's this construct of a super use case, and how are you saying, hang on, there's a body of knowledge coming through EDM currently, which is talking about that kind of ROI construct, always looking at it through that lens. Are you seeing that's an
JG,
unlocker?
I suppose what I wanted to talk about first, before I just wanted to show the work that I'm working on, the data ROI data group in the EDM Council who are busy preparing that ROI framework, which is very exciting. And they're also now preparing what they call a data co-ROI, which is companies that are set up that are used by the parent company to achieve data value. So you can almost value your data co and get a revenue out of that. But what I wanted to introduce really was a situation of, we have to be careful of the culture of our organization and whether the operating model is centralized, decentralized, federated, and that complicates the ownership tremendously, because if you're federated or decentralized in any way, you've got the same subject area across multiple business units, business domains, or things like that. So now you have to get into possible coordinating stewards, executive data stewards, to help bring the data owners and to bring this stuff together. So sometimes what I like to do is first of all take a step back and examine the culture that I'm working in before I go into my owners of the subject areas. And some of my experiences have been that we try to use that sort of original crud where the people that create it are the owners, and it's a good place to start, because you're not starting on a blank page. But then it goes to, well, sometimes the 360 person that's responsible for the master data analytics, they way more interested in a more holistic picture of the domain than the people who create the initials. So there's quite a lot of, I find, lots and lots of debates as to getting this right and getting the right people in those positions, and then the stewards that support them and the technical guys that support them, and so there's I find that to be a quite tricky thing to navigate, and can get caught in the culture quite quickly if I'm not aware of it.
Thanks for that. Yolanda, this sparked something for you. Give us a sense as what are you thinking?
as I'm listening to the conversation, and I want to start off by adding to that construct of business value chain versus data value chain. The value chain, the business value chain, is the beginning or end all, I think, of where everything starts and lands with regards to data. Because what is the business value chain? It's really just a framework to help us articulate, what does this business do? And how does this business create value for their target market? What does data do? Data essentially is dead. Data is really just telling the story of what is happening in the business value chain. And the data value chain is more of a business has happened. Now, how do we take that data and how do we gradually improve the structure of the data so that the story of what has happened in my business becomes evident and becomes clearer and understandable from the data? The data is the record of what has happened in the business value chain. And if we approach it like that, I think it becomes extremely crystal clear as to how the data value chain flows from the business value chain. And as I'm talking, I'm to Howard's premise on data ownership. It's in business, but it's, I lost connection for a second there.
Yeah.
You're back.
Yes, you're back.
How does the business value chain, data value chain flow into the ownership construct? I told the client the other day, you know what? There's only one owner of the data, and that is the organization. The legal entity of the business owns the data. All the people, all the leaders in the business are custodians or stewards of that data. So I think maybe the answer to that dilemma that we've been debating for years now lies in multi-ownership or multi-responsibility and accountability for the data. And that is where Maritza's approach leans towards that shared ownership between business and data. Depending on where the data is in the value chain, there might be data custodians in the data office partnering with which business domain is that data describing, and that business owner is the steward of that data, and together that accountability is then shared in the organization.
Yolanda and Maritza. Just
I want to
unmute
add,
there from...
just for a second. I want to add something there because I like the term that Yolanda used around multi-ownership, and I think that's very true in complex organizations. If you take customer, for example, and how difficult it is to find the owner for customer. But customer doesn't just have one owner. Customer has multiple owners depending on which component of the business value chain and the customer journey you're looking at. So maybe, you know, customer information, new customer information sits in operations. Maybe the COO is the owner of customer application data, but the marketing director is responsible for consent data. So I think that is definitely something that is a reality of complex organizations. And sometimes it's easier to start with the business processes and who's responsible for what business processes and roll that up into subdomains and then, you know, your data domains.
Absolutely. I'm aware that we're 15 minutes 15 minutes into our Q&A, and it's just so Yolanda, that's thank you for just offering that kind of perspective in terms of ownership. And then Maritza, as you're saying, there's this overlay, and one should take time to separate out the overlay, because otherwise, if you don't, you know, you can literally get that away response, and that kind of talks to the cultural resistance that Howard has highlighted. So I think as data professionals, we actually we hold enough context to create an environment, a cohesive environment of discussion versus an alienated discussion of diversion. So that's been really an exciting point of the discussion we've had. I want to reach out just to the community. I'm looking for a set of hands. Are there any other questions that you want to pose to Maritza? If not, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to just wrap up. So I'm just looking for hands if anybody would like to just reach out. And there I was going to give him the closing argument, but he wants to start with the open. I mean, you just got to love this guy. Over to the guy in the yellow jersey, the leader of the...
Thanks,
Howard.
JG. Such a nice guy. Thank you.
Oh, of course, Howard.
So one of the challenges we've faced is that prioritization can be quite subjective. It can sometimes link to the most influential or the highest person in the room. But what we have been doing with this work with the ROI is, if we can, I like what you said about being able to justify the ROI, if we can provide a commercial feasibility for that data product, and then using the maturity assessment to assess the technical feasibility, are we actually capable of doing it? We could rank the priority. Is that something that you do to give some level of numbers so that we can, you know, we have a more objective view of what the priority is?
Yeah, I think something like an opportunity matrix, which does exactly what you just described. There's another tool that's used by analysts, which is very similar to an opportunity matrix. I can't remember what it's called now. It's an acronym. That, Yolanda, I don't know if you remember what it's called, or if you know what it's called. I can't remember now, but basically it is exactly that. It is scoring the business value and scoring the technical feasibility of the solution. And there's not the best matrix, but the best matrix is a good example of where you can, you build your opportunity matrix in the same way. But the score that you get in the end, that opportunity score, is the product of business value and technical feasibility. And you want to start with a sweet spot, which is, you know, where you're going to get the most business value with the least amount of effort.
And the best feasible technical capability, as you were saying.
Yeah, and what I have seen when I've used an opportunity matrix like that is that the prioritization discussion becomes objective.
Yeah.
Because now it's a data-driven discussion. It's not subjective. It's not the person who's the most influential or shouting the loudest. It's based on facts.
Could I ask you another question? When we go to commercial feasibility, I commonly hear from the CFOs is that they just don't believe those ROI calculations. They say they're a load of rubbish. It's just made up, and we just hype it up like we do with business cases for new projects and new tech. They say, I'm not sure where you get the data, and that's where we like to spend some time with the CFO, understanding how we can rank it. And then the next challenge becomes, how do we apply an accounting treatment to measure that ROI from an accounting point of view, and not just, you know, let's propose it and then maybe 4 years later we'll check whether we got the ROI or not.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if you have measures like commercial uplift, you need to partner with finance. Finance becomes your
Yeah.
best friend because they can
Yeah.
help you define the measure and how you're going to calculate it. And that lands far better than if you, as the data owner, not the data owner, the data leader, comes up with that calculation. It probably doesn't have as much authority as when it is the CFO.
Sure. And I think that leads into what EDM are trying to do with this data office ROI, is to be able to say, what is the return on investment for the data leader, so that they don't be seen as another cost center and just someone that's not delivering any value. I think we get exposed as CDOs when we're not accounting properly for the value that we contribute.
Yeah, yeah. And you know what? And that's right, Howard. It's actually right. We should be challenged on how we measure the value of data and analytics. We should think it through. And it's the same as if, you know, the chief operating officer has to ask for funding to add additional agents to the call center, for example. You know, they're not going to you know, she will be challenged if she doesn't have a proper business case. And it's the same for data and analytics. We certainly can't cut corners. You know, we have to be as certain and as intentional about our business cases as everyone else in the organization.
Awesome. I think that's such a powerful closeout comment. And I'd like to maybe just take this opportunity to wrap it on that. Is accountability at a data side is it's sexy and and you know, but that's how you go into the hype cycle, is if you don't close out with the value and the fact that it's you know, so avoiding the hype cycle by actually you know, recording on value, delivering on value, and then reporting back against value. So I want to take this as an opportunity just to thank the community for participating. Next week, we've got a really exciting chat about how one of the key liquor producers in our country is taking on their data and looking to potentially pivot from how do you go from production through to a stronger emotive call in terms of using your data for customer-driven analytics that takes you away from the product to the field. So I want to encourage everybody to join us next week for that. And also I want to just say thank you, Maritza. It's just been such a pleasure to have you on. You are such a beacon of just I want to say hope, but yeah, just a beacon of
You can say that.
of intent.
I'll take it.
Awesome. So I'm gonna add to it. Beacon of hope.
Thank you.
Particularly for the ladies in our community, please follow these key leaders in our community, just pioneering the way. It's just awesome to have you on board, and in particular, just always love it when you address the groups. I think you bring such a lovely level of pragmatism and realness to data, particularly for those folk who want to continue to think that it's kind of like, you know, it's this black box stuff. It just isn't. It's so not helpful to think of it like that. So thank you so much for joining us. We really look forward to when that happens again. And thank you to the community for joining us. Let's go and have an amazing week, everybody. And Howard, your week is finished. So have a good weekend. Cheers,
Thank
everybody.
you very much. Cheers, everybody. Thanks, JG. Thanks, Maritza, Yolanda. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Nice to see all of you.
Bye.